Hello everyone, I'm Tamara and today I'm going to talk to you about complex PTSD and borderline personality disorder. And I'm going to put out a disclaimer because I am still learning about complex PTSD at the time that we're talking about it and just trying to differentiate some differences. I think I finally get it, and that's why I want to make a video on it from my perspective. At first, I was kind of like, why do we need that diagnosis in there? Borderline personality disorder has already been defined. But I think they're saying that some people who have borderline personality disorder can also have C-PTSD, and then there are people who do not have borderline personality disorder who can have complex PTSD. I wanted to make this video number one because some people are trying to replace borderline personality disorder with this, and I do not like the idea of that. I think it's useful because there are some people who do not fit all the criteria of borderline personality disorder, and there are some gaps. It's like they show some signs of it, but then they don't show other signs of it. Like you can kind of fit them into the diagnosis, but they just, for some reason, they don't fit, and yet they fit, and it's confusing. So I think some people just simply have complex PTSD, and that in itself is very useful. I think people with CPTSD can have an underlying sadness that's there for most of their adulthood, and they may go in and out of it. They may have laughter sometimes, they may be silly and have fun, but there's this overall undertone of just a sadness. It's kind of like you want to help the person type thing, and you never quite can because there's always a lane that they travel in that's kind of sad or unhappy or miserable, or they can't quite get what they're wanting. It's like they want more friends, or they want more support, or they feel a lot of anxiety. It's just there. That's the best way I can explain it, is somebody who is just going through life sad, but yet they have a lot of talents, they have a lot of skills, they're capable of maintaining a job, no problem. They can be highly successful actually, but they're still, when you get into their personal life, even if they seemingly have everything that anybody would ever want, there's just this underlying sadness. They also can have emotion regulation difficulties with anger and areas of being highly sensitive, which is an area that borderlines have. They're agitated, they're frustrated, it could be the slightest thing, like there could be a temperature change and they're going ballistic on everybody. So there can be, I think, a heightened sensitivity with just regulating their emotions, where they're just snapping and they're going off, and it just doesn't quite make sense. And I think, what they say is CPTSD can be developed at I'm thinking that it can be developed at any age of childhood. Like anything could trigger it. Just like with PTSD, you're not born with it, but something triggers it. I think with borderline personality disorder, there's more of a genetic component, but I also think that environment plays a big factor in that. And I don't often hear people talk about that, but that was like the base of my training in psychology. We talked a lot about that, about how the earliest years of your life, it's thought to believe that your brain is wiring and forming around whatever experiences. So people think that babies and toddlers won't remember, that you can just do anything to them. You can bounce them everywhere, you could abuse them, you could put them anywhere, you could not see them for weeks or not even a month. And that is absolutely not true. That is a great way to create someone who has a lifelong personality disorder. It's very dangerous to do that. And I think that with CPTSD, that's not necessarily the case. Maybe they had poverty in their childhood that they struggled with. Maybe they had a parent that was, traumatized or had some mental stressors like schizophrenia, or something happened, and so there was, it's kind of like they could have developed borderline personality disorder, but for some reason they didn't, but they still have some trauma as a result of going through situations that could have been out of their control. So we said with CPTSD, you get emotional dysregulation, dissociation, which can also be seen in PTSD because the brain has learned how to dissociate, but they believe it's more severe in C-PTSD. And keep in mind, I don't think everybody has all these symptoms. I think somebody can have this disorder and never dissociate, honestly. So, but some people can. They can have difficulty with self-perception, like shame, guilt, a negative concept of self. And that's where that, you can have a highly intelligent person who seems to be very successful, and yet they're grappling with those types of things, shame and guilt, and it just sometimes it's like, why though? Like, it doesn't make any sense. They have a preoccupation with a perpetrator. They can be seeking revenge or thinking about the person. I mean, and just think about how you feel when someone has wronged you. So it wouldn't be unusual for them to be obsessed or not be able to get their thoughts off of someone who hurt them. But I don't think that everyone who has CPTSD necessarily had a perpetrator. That's just my opinion. They may not have had that at all. They just had some things that kind of weren't going quite right at some point, possibly during their childhood. They can have loss of meaning where they feel a sense of hopelessness, and I think that can come through very strong on someone who has that, but they don't have borderline personality disorder. They can have a negative sense of self, but borderlines might have more instability in their sense of self. And that's just, negative sense of self could be kind of, you're always down on yourself, or you're kind of hard on yourself, or you don't see the value in who you are. But yet, I think some people with CPTSD can be quite confident in many areas. Like, they may be great speech writers or good speakers or presenters or whatever. So I think they could possibly have a pretty strong sense of self in one hand. Borderlines tend to not know who they are. So it's like they have identity issues where it's like I hop on something, now I'm this, and now I'm not. Now I'm into church, now I'm not. Now they can be all over the place. Like, they can ask you things like, tell me who I am. They can't describe their personality, which I think sometimes people with CPTSD can also struggle with that a little bit, with defining who they are, like telling you verbally. But I think they still have more, they can still, and not all of them, because if you have borderline personality disorder, you're not gonna, it's a whole different thing. But someone who only has that, they may have a negative sense of self, where that kind of down thing, feeling down, but they're a lot more stable than a borderlines would be. And that loss of meaning, hopelessness, that's the part that I started off talking about, where it's kind of, it's not the same emptiness as a borderline, but it's kind of an emptiness. Like, you feel a sense of like empty, like longing, like something just isn't quite complete for them. And it makes me kind of sad, actually. Treatment, I think you can help them to create a positive self-concept, help them to restore their sense of power and control. So you want to empower them. You You want to help them with social avoidance issues. That's another thing. It's like on one hand, they can be, in the circles that they feel comfortable with, maybe like church. They could be all over the church, friendly, talking to different people and all of that. But it can be kind of difficult, especially sometimes the older they get. Even it could either get better or worse, where it becomes more and more difficult for them to make themselves do new things, try new things that could make them really happy, that they could really enjoy, because they always go back to that place of, I'm not happy. I don't have enough connections. I'm not doing enough. I feel lonely. I don't have enough activities in life. But then when you try to bring them new activities to try, they don't want to do it. There's a social avoidance there that needs to be worked on. So let's talk about some reason why I don't think it should be replaced. They could remove some of the criteria and replace them with the words C-PTSD, but that would still mean they would have to describe the criteria for C-PTSD, and that would be confusing. So keep C-PTSD separate. In my opinion, these people do not necessarily have borderline personality disorder. If a person's C-PTSD is extreme, they're probably not going to have it. That means that they really have borderline personality disorder and should be diagnosed as such. C-PTSD is good for those who were forcing into the title BPD when it just didn't fit. There was something off. So some of these people just don't quite fit the borderline mold. C-PTSD makes sense by itself. However, what's confusing is some people sprinkle a little more borderline symptoms into it than other people do, and that throws it off. And I think the overlap is mood dysregulation, feeling of emptiness, loneliness, increased sense of guilt, difficulties with anger, and decreased self-worth. I think with borderlines, you're going to see self-harm, suicidal behaviors, fear of abandonment. And I think C-PTSD, they can tap into that area a little bit. Not to the extreme that a borderline would, but unless they have the actual diagnosis of borderline. Borderlines are more impulsive. They're more love-hate, idealization and devaluation as opposed to the other one. They can have an unstable sense of self, negative self, and positive next day. It can fluctuate. C-PTSD is more steady by itself, I think. Borderline personality disorder is described better as an unstable self-concept. And so I don't know. I hope that sheds some light and clarity, because it's super confusing to me. And that's why I wanted to do the video. So please like the video, share it with people that you think can help. I know it's not a perfect video, but it might help some people to get clarity, because that's just what I've seen. And I'm thankful for the diagnosis, because like I said, some people do not quite fit that borderline diagnosis, but they do fit what my brain is telling me, that complex PTSD is isolated by itself. Okay? So please like the video, please share it, please subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye-bye.